This is campaign video number 3 of 90, and today's topic I want to discuss is the Department of Defense budget and explain a little bit of my reasoning as to my position on the Department of Defense budget. Obviously on September 11th, 2001, we had a very tragic event here in the United States. But since that time, terrorism in the United States has been virtually non-existent. And since that time, there have only been 30 deaths in the United States from terrorism-related incidents. Actually, that statistic is in the 10 years after 2011, so maybe it's slightly more now. But 30 deaths within a 10-year period. Your current chance of dying in a terrorist attack in the United States is now 1 in 20 million. It's extremely low. Comparing that to other ways you could possibly die, your chance of being struck by lightning is 1 in 5.5 million. Your chance of dying in a tsunami, 1.5 million. Your chance of dying by being struck by an asteroid, 1 in 200,000. Your chance of dying in an attack by a dog, 1 in 150,000. Your chance of dying by a snake bite, 1 in 300,000. And your chance of dying by a tornado, 1 in 60,000. Very small. They're all very small. But actually, they're all much more likely than the possibility of you dying in a terrorist attack. Now, if you consider these statistics logically, you would think that the United States government would try and eradicate tornadoes, asteroids, snakes, or possibly dogs. After all, those are a much higher threat to Americans than is terrorism. However, the United States has not taken that path and has instead tried to eradicate terrorism from the United States. And that's what I'm going to talk about here over the next couple minutes. In the years since 2011, the U.S. government has spent $3 trillion on wars in the Middle East and on the war on terrorism to try and stop terrorism here in the United States and abroad. These wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and various police actions have benefited the United States citizens very little. Interestingly enough, if were to accept the fact that these attacks were due to the 9/11 attacks here in the U.S., I question why we haven't invaded Saudi Arabia, as 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were in fact from Saudi Arabia. However, I take no position on that. I just leave that as food for thought at this time. Mitt Romney and his running mate Ryan, and of course my opponent Mr. Wahlberg, all want to enact austerity measures on American citizens, particularly the middle class and the elderly. However, none of them want to cut the Department of Defense budget. In fact, all of them want to raise the Department of Defense budget, which in light of these statistics, I would have to ask, why? Let's look at the Department of Defense budget. Currently, it's 20% of the United States' entire budget. It's also 50% of the worldwide defense budget. So chew on that for a minute. 50% of the worldwide defense budget. So the United States spends an amount equal to what every other country in the world spends on defense. That's crazy. The country that spends the second most amount, China, spends 8% of the worldwide budget. 8%. So we have a drop-off of 50% for the number one country spending on defense, down to 8% for the number two country spending on defense. You would think Russia, another large country, would spend a huge amount on defense. No, they spend 4% of the worldwide budget on defense. Very small amount. Germany, the military powerhouse from World War I and World War II, spends 2.5% of the worldwide budget on defense. So you can see how out of whack here the U.S. spending on the Department of Defense budget really is. It's really out of control. Yet Tim Walberg wants more defense spending and to implement the Ryan budget, of course, which both of them want to end Social Security and Medicare, as well as many, many other programs that would affect the the middle class and the elderly. Yet give more money to the Department of Defense. It's really crazy. Logically, wouldn't you think that spending maybe 25% of the worldwide budget on defense would be enough? After all, it would still be more than triple what China spends, and much more than that as compared to every other country. You know, if I told you that at the start of the video, that I would want the U.S. Department of Defense budget to be 25% of the worldwide budget, more than triple what China spends, you'd probably say, hey, that sounds like a great idea. That sounds like a huge amount to spend on defense. We're going to be safe and protected. In reality, that would be a 50% cut in the Department of Defense budget, and that just goes to show you how out of whack the Department of Defense budget really is. It's crazy once you think about it, and it just plays on people's fear of being attacked by Muslim extremists, when the chances of that happening are so low that really it should not even be an everyday thought in the mind of most Americans. For those of you that think the war on terror has made you more safe, it has not. The pre-9/11 statistics on Americans dying in terrorist attacks are very, very similar to the post-9/11 statistics on Americans dying in terrorist attacks. And I have to question whether the nonstop wars in the Middle East are actually making us more safe or less safe, because when you think about it, and think about it in these terms, if we were the country that was being invaded and bombs were being dropped here, destroying our infrastructure, killing our families, blowing up our businesses, and that sort of thing for many, many years, what would you think about the country that had been doing that to you and your family and your friends? And when you look at it that way, you have to think that maybe we're creating so much animosity in the Middle East that it will be a larger danger for the U.S. going forward. And I wonder if, in fact, we're creating an entire generation and throughout an entire region of the world that will hate Americans relentlessly going forward, instead of just a small group of extremists that perpetrated the 9/11 attacks. So think about that for a minute. And for those of you that think throwing more money at the war on terror will make you more safe, well, I have news for you. Nothing will make you completely safe from the war on terror. There will always be a possibility that you will die in a terrorist attack. However, it is a very, very, very small percentage. Very small. I'm not scared of dying in a terrorist attack. And really, I don't think you should be either. I mean, the chances are just so small. You should be much more worried about, say, getting hit by lightning or getting hit by an asteroid, because your chances of dying in one of those two incidents are actually much, much higher. It's my belief that the nonstop wars in the Middle East must end, and the war on terror must be greatly scaled back. A large portion of the funds allocated for the Department of Defense should be reallocated to programs here at home to help stimulate the economy and or help the middle class, instead of having these austerity measures and cutbacks that Mr. Walberg wants. And also, remember, he wants to increase the Department of Defense spending. So it just shows how out of touch Mr. Walberg is with what's really going on in this country. You know, it's time to end the rhetoric. It's time to stop this bickering back and forth between the parties. And it's time to do something that actually benefits the citizens of the United States, and to have people actually look at statistics and numbers, probability and reality, and not have a government that bases things on how scared people are. Um, you know, the 9/11 attacks were very scary. I admit that. But you should not be scared of future terrorist attacks, especially in light of what I've told you here today. So thanks for taking a few minutes and listening to me today, and I look forward to talking to you again tomorrow. Thank you.